I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. Tonight's episode, COVID-19 and pajama pants. So when this episode posts, there's a good chance that the majority, if not all the country, will be on some sort of a lockdown, stay in place, and any other directive order being given that mean essentially the same thing. So I'm going to talk about that from a cop's perspective, and then I'll give a short story at the end, both of which are going to involve wearing our pajamas. I've had a number of people call, text, reach out in some form or fashion on the COVID issue, and granted, it's at the top of the list for most of us as a daily concern. I think that a lot of these folks hope I'm going to have some inside info like I used to when I was working, but unfortunately I don't. I haven't really bothered, any of those old guys that are still working for the department for any information because I just know they're busy. And I think I probably have a good idea what they're going to say anyway. That said, I can address the issue from a cop's perspective. I'm not going to get into the discussion or the argument for the need or the relevance of these stay-at-home orders or the recommendations, the politicians' announcements, or the pronouncements. It's a waste of breath and time. It's kind of like arguing or debating the Second Amendment, politics, and religion. The vast majority of people already have their opinion on these issues, and short of God revealing himself and speaking in a voice like Morgan Freeman's, their opinion's not going to change. You want to really get into an interesting discussion or argument, bring up the topic of celebrities and sports figures wading into any number of the topics that we just discussed. Well, this hasn't reached the level of martial law. That's one of the questions, and hopefully it won't, because that would be a whole new scary level. Different story. And then people ask about enforcement actions for where we are currently. And I find it funny how the first thing that some people think of is, how are you going to catch me and what will the punishment be versus how can I do my part? Where there is a method in place for penalty, I'll equate it this way. You're driving your car on the freeway. You're doing 75 in a 65 mile an hour zone. The chances of you getting stopped is very small, given that most are doing the same thing and it's not dangerous in the big scheme of things. No one's very concerned. Now, the guy that's doing 105 in the same 65 zone, he's very likely to get stopped. And in law enforcement, a lot of times we call these people attention seekers because they exhibit that behavior that tells us that they really want our attention for some reason over and above anybody else. These are the same people that like to tell us that we're number one with their middle finger and yell mean things at us when we're trying to just do our job. All will result in our giving you our attention so that you don't feel ignored. And sometimes we'll just take you with us and give you even more attention because you'll often forget about that arrest warrant or that bit of dope that you have in your pocket or something else. So then you get even more attention. Well, back to our speeder. In addition to asking for attention, the other reasons that this guy is going to be stopped is because he is an obvious threat to safety. People will be calling 911 to advise on his recklessness and his location, and he needs to be stopped far above and beyond the average person. It's fairly common sense. This is how this would be enforced. There's not going to be cops on every corner with yardsticks enforcing social distance between every two people that they see. They will most likely be responding to calls about large gatherings or people doing something that is obviously detrimental to the point of the distancing order or directive. Trust me, the cops don't want to use their time enforcing any of this any more than you want to abide by it. And while assaults and homicides, robberies, crime in general may decrease in some areas as a result of this, but it certainly doesn't stop. And in fact, if I was a betting man, I'm going to bet that domestic violence and related calls are actually going to increase due to all the closeness that we're going to experience. I'm fairly sure my thoughts on this are pretty similar to that of medical professionals, hose draggers, prison and detention, the court system. Think about those petri dishes. And anyone else involved with the judicial system or first responder operations. If we had it our way, no one would do anything. Complete shutdown of everything. That way there's no one in need of police response, fire response, or medical response. End of story. But honestly, that goes for any day of the week, way before the COVID-19 issue and afterward. For as long as there's been first responders, there's always been indirect risks and exposures we've had to worry about. So let's go back to one of the worst that we've dealt with in, I guess, modern times, the Spanish flu, which is back in like 1918, 1920. Now, I'm not near smart enough or quite frankly want to go into all the details of how devastating and terrible that one was, but it's safe to say that it was far, far worse than what we're experiencing now. Back then, there were cops and firemen and doctors and nurses and first responder type people that were just doing their jobs, getting exposed, exposing their families, and then some dying from this Spanish flu. They didn't want to come into contact with anyone for any reason and feared transmitting it to anyone else, just like now. With the exception of a few things, these folks don't have a choice. If they're going to do their job, which is truly essential unless we want complete anarchy and lots of dead people, they have to respond to calls for service and be exposed. Those people, as now, kind of look at the rest of the population in something like this, and you just got to scratch your head a little bit. Why would you unnecessarily expose yourself and your family and your friends to something when you don't have to? Do you feel invincible? Do you believe the situation is overblown or it's a conspiracy? Do you feel that it's an infringement on your constitutional rights? Nobody's going to be the boss of me, on and on. And there's others. I've heard most of them by now, as I'm sure you have. Well, during this particular incident with this COVID-19, if you ask any of these public safety folks if they'd like to stay home and not be exposed, I'm pretty confident you get a very high percentage of them that would do just that. But they can't and don't because there's work to be done, people to help, lives to save in order to be kept. And if coronavirus was the only thing that they had to worry about, that would honestly be great. But there's more behind door 3, Bob. There are arguably more dangerous and deadly diseases and viruses out there that first responders specifically have to worry about all the time, not just for now with this CV thing. There's hepatitis, MRSA, tuberculosis, HIV, and on and on. So for them, let's just add another alphabet term to the list, right? When you do those jobs, you come home from work most of the time and take off your boots and your clothes almost as soon as you walk in the house, or on an especially nasty day, probably out in the garage, to try to minimize exposure to your family or friends. And then a shower as soon as you can. How's work? We served a search warrant on a meth lab, and one of the guys fought us, and turns out he's got MRSA, so that's awesome. How's your day? So let's personify this as it relates to now. I have little reason to go out now, other than for food and sidewalk distance checks of parents and neighbors. But let's say that I feel because of, put your argument in here, I'm going to go visit with my friends way across town. I'm driving in my truck and I get into a wreck and I get seriously hurt. So look at all these people who are going to have to respond and are going to be exposed to me. The cops, the hose draggers, ambo drivers, other citizens, nurses, doctors, on and on. Every one of those exposures are avoidable, and conversely, I've succeeded in exposing myself to some of the highest risk people there are. This is one of those bigger than me situations where you need to think about the common good more so than your personal desires to go do stuff. I'm not worried about getting deathly sick or further dying. I'm not worried about that with regard to my wife and daughters either. But I am worried about my folks, my in-laws, and others that are in kind of that similar pool of people, the elderly, people with pre-existing conditions, etc., and transmitting anything to them if I have to go help them or be in close proximity for some reason. That's the thing I think people are missing. You can carry the virus, never exhibit any symptoms, but you can pass that nastiness along to anybody else that you come into contact with. Perfect example. Just like a week ago, I had to take a couple of coolers, actually take a few coolers, over to my parents' house because their refrigerator conked out, and it wasn't going to get fixed for a few days. Well, of course, I felt the need to help them unload everything, including their pound quantities of butter, don't ask, and other stuff into these coolers. Now, I'm not saying you stay inside your home and barricade the doors and never leave and watch the news outlet of choice 24/7. Please don't do that. There are things you can and should do during this event. Get food, get essentials, get medical attention and medication as needed. Take care of those who need it and exercise. Any way you can, even if it's just going outside for a walk. It's good for your health, your mental outlook, and to keep you from strangling one of the people you live with, a la Homer Simpson strangling Bart. Read books, binge watch, play games, FaceTime, learn a language, do a project, reconnect, clean the house, do the yard. Marvel at how long your kid can stay in bed. Make a wish list of all the things that you're going to do once we get through this. One thing I don't understand is the whole toilet paper hoard, especially when most people that I've seen are going to run out of food before toilet paper, the results of which would be self-fulfilling. It'd be comical if it weren't for the people that are out there that are truly looking for some and can't find it. Do the math. You don't need 300 rolls of toilet paper per person to get through this when it keeps coming into the stores. You have to stay positive. We will get through this like everything else. And put things in perspective. Unless you live in Antarctica, which, by the way, is the only country with no CV cases last I heard, you have plenty of access to social media and news. And I already checked, they won't let you in to Antarctica right now. Social media has its place during a mess like this. It connects people, it entertains, and it reminds us of all the people who are helping to get us through it. Unfortunately, it can also confuse and mislead, so be careful as to what you believe. A lot of fake news out there. And again, it can put things in perspective. I think one of the biggest takeaways I've gotten so far is that we as individuals have experienced far worse many times. The one that stuck out to me was a Vietnam War vet commenting on a post regarding the high school seniors all across the country not being able to have their typical graduation ceremonies and celebrations and parties. And I can totally sympathize with this. I mean, I have a senior in the house and she's pretty bummed out about it. I get it. Again, I sympathize with her. But this vet said that he remembered his high school graduation ceremony consisted of getting shipped to Vietnam for war and subsequently watching as many of his friends were injured or killed during his tour of duty. You can find any number of comments that strike a chord with you and help you with your perspective, but you get the point. So coming full circle from the public safety and first responders perspective, please only do the things that you need to do, period. Not for you, but for the others, and especially them. And I haven't even touched on all the other men and women out there working and potentially being exposed doing things that we all take for granted. Food delivery and distribution, garbage collection, all forms of deliveries, home repair trades, city services like water and sewer, electric, gas, and so many more. Make sure that you tell them all thank you at every opportunity you get and let them know that they're appreciated. If we lose too many of our first responders and these other essential people to quarantines and or sickness, we're really going to be in trouble before this gets better. And before you know it, you'll be worrying far more about finding enough food and keeping it than hoarding the toilet paper. I'll close with a big thank you to all of you who have continued to work and work far more than usual to keep us all living what amounts to, so far, an inconvenienced life. Now, hopefully, a little levity. Working plainclothes assignment's a great gig for a number of reasons, but it does present some odd predicaments at times. One of these is being able to transition from working in normal clothes to working in your uniform for some type of enforcement purpose. For what I used to do, this would consist of needing to gear up for an immediate arrest situation or a last-minute search warrant or a SWAT call-out. Any of these sometimes didn't allow for a complete change of wardrobe, so you threw on what was essential. Your ballistic vest, which was either a jump vest as we call it, or a lighter weight vest, or your heavy SWAT vest, and then, your gun belt, a rifle if it was needed, and your helmet. The things were always kept immediately accessible, either inside your UC car or in the trunk or storage box if you had a truck. In either case, the last thing to change if there was time was your pants or shorts and your shoes. If you pay attention to some of these active shooter incidents or some of these things that unfold in a hurry and get really nasty, or you watch a SWAT team deploy on a hot call, you'll see a lot of these guys that are in jeans and tennis shoes with all the rest of their police gear on. And the whole point is we're just trying to get out there and go to work as quick as possible. It's not so much preferred by administrators, but it's tolerated and it's understood. At this point, if any of my guys had a voice in this, they'd probably make sure to remind me of how slow I was to get dressed and or geared up. The term anal could come out. Guilty, but it's just another reason to not bother changing pants and boots. They'd also want to talk about the doormat that I kept with me so they didn't have to stand on the street or ground or the dirt when I changed my shoes. And that's when I'd cut their mic. Well, sometimes you'd pull up to a call or incident unfolding and you had to change in front of a bunch of bystanders or neighbors who were already gawking at everything, so you tried to keep the exposure to a minimum by not stripping down to your skivvies. Well, I worked in the Phoenix area, as I've said, and it's pretty much shorts weather there for 10 of the 12 months. So like many of my guys, our daily uniform was shorts and a t-shirt. There are numerous times we'd be stacked up on a door of a place wearing all of our black SWAT gear and helmets with a pair of shorts and tennis shoes on. It could be quite the look depending on your choice of shorts and shoes for that day. There's one particular incident that unfolded at a shopping mall in the Phoenix area, and our SWAT team was called and responded to assist in this other jurisdiction. The call-out first involved a U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force that one of my guys happened to be assigned to at the time. They had attempted to arrest a fugitive and ended up getting in a shootout with them, and then the guy ran into the mall. Well, right after this all unfolded, there was a robbery attempt that turned into a hostage situation at a fast food place that was literally just a few hundred yards across the street. It took us a while to just figure out that the two incidents weren't related because we are all convinced that the hostage taker was the same guy who fled during the shootout with the marshals. That whole day was just a big mess for those guys. Well, anyway, I had gotten to the scene and threw on my gear, didn't change my shorts or shirt, and I was coordinating with my guys and going here and there, and we were working the robbery side of the problem, establishing the perimeter positions, gathering intel, prepping the negotiations side, and on and on. And of course, all the local news outlets were there as a big deal and had cameras rolling. Well, we got set up to work the incident, but once things kind of slowed down a little bit, I actually left to go back to work in a wiretap investigation that I happened to be supervising at that time with another jurisdiction. And the reason was between our team and the other agencies' teams, they had plenty of guys and supervisors there to handle that robbery hostage call as well as the mess at the mall. So I just went back to where I had been before the call out, to this wiretap. Well, those various departments were all able to conclude both the incidents without anybody getting hurt, and all was good. Well, a good friend of mine, Chris, lives a short distance away from that mall area, and he'd noticed everything going on with all the emergency vehicles and the helicopters. So he turns on the news and he's watching and trying to figure out if, they're cool being at the house or if he needs to go. Well, as he's watching, he sees kind of a wide shot of a bunch of Tempe tactical cops standing near one of our armored trucks, and he sees a guy wearing trademark plaid shorts, me, with all my SWAT gear on. He couldn't see my face so much due to the distance, and we were kind of partially behind the truck at various points, but he definitely recognized those shorts. So he tells his son Alex, who's about 8 at the time, he says, "Hey, look, there's Daddy's friend on TV." Well, Alex acknowledges and he pauses, and then he asks, "The one in the pajama pants?" Well, Chris got a good laugh about it and tried to explain it, but Alex had a really hard time understanding why Dad's friend, the policeman, was wearing his pajama pants to work. Chris called me later and we had a good laugh about it, and for some years after that, Chris's family didn't refer to me as Kevin. I was Pajama Pants. For those of you in the business sectors that are most affected by this economic crash and slowdown and coronavirus crap, i.e. entertainment and restaurants, travel, etc., I truly hope this ends soon and you all can recover as quickly as possible. Good luck to everybody, and take care of yourselves. With that, I close this episode of I Barely Got Here. I want to thank you for listening, and if you like the show, please subscribe and post a review, and ask your friends to give it a listen. If you have a question or a comment, you can shoot me an email at ibarelygothere@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Sam42 is 107.